Chapter 1 Reborn Through Fire. You are listening at FameTV.info. The ruckus outside was unusual. Everyone was smiling happily. There were a handsome groom and a slender bride who was wearing a large red veil. The festive colors blinded everyone, the sounds of laughter and firecrackers permeated the air with joy and happiness except for her. She walked alone in the unbridled atmosphere. Mo Shuang stood at the corner of the room near the drapes. Her simple clothing could not hide the bloodthirsty hatred in her eyes. She looked at Mo Shuang and Sima Lingyun. One was smiling coyly while the other smiled gently and warmly. They held hands as they walked toward her. She held a flint tightly in her hand and could not help but shake lightly. The relationship the three of them shared was ridiculous. Who could have thought that while one of them was her elder sister and the other her husband, but that she was the wife they wanted to kill with a bowl of poisoned wine? They killed Mo Yu and Mother Su. They had even killed Yuer, whom she had named herself, who was still a child swaddled in blankets. Mo Shuang, do you really think he will love you? You ugly creature, you already look like this. You might as well die. Why do you bother living and embarrassing yourself? Rest assured. I'll take your place in the future. I'll guard your mother's dowry for you. You'd better die now. The sadness and hopelessness brought by hatred tore apart Mo Shuang's heart. Even if she fell to the depths of hell, she would be willing. She'll take the adulterous pair with her. She looked at the adulterous couple outside the red tent viciously. Mo Shuang lit the tent up with deadly calmness. She hated them, how could she not? She wanted to drink their blood and eat their flesh. One could not see her black pupils in her blood-colored eyes. Since heaven was so unfair, she'll seek revenge for herself. The red tent caught fire immediately. The guests ran in all directions frantically and the wedding hall descended into chaos. The groom, Sima Lingyun, moved swiftly. He pulled Mo Shuang, who was still clueless about what had happened, out of the tent. However, she raised her legs a few times but was pressed down heavily to the ground. She looked down. The corner of her gown was tightly caught. The fire grew stronger. Objects started falling from above. A beam swayed precariously above them. The wedding hall might collapse at any time. Sima Lingyun was flustered. He kicked viciously at Mo Shuang, who was holding his gown tightly. Mo Shuang had tugged off her veil and ran outside frantically. A massive beam fell from above Mo Shuang as they tugged and pulled. It fell heavily on her and her head smashed onto the ground. Blood flowed from her head and blinded her eyes. The shrill screaming in her head did not allow her to think. She stared at Sima Lingyun through the blood. Her blood-stained smile was sharp and devoid of hope. If she could live again, she would definitely have them pay their debts in blood. She would have the adulterous pair live in hell forever. Even if she had to turn into a ghost, she was willing to use herself in exchange to take them both together with her to hell. Mo Shuang, Sima Lingyun, I swear on my child and my soul. I will make you two experience 100,000 times the pain you've set on me. Her voice was like a curse that reverberated throughout the fiery scene long after. Qingwei Gardens. Mo Shuang remained in the position in which she had woken up from. Her fists were clenched tightly and her body was rigid. The pain of the fire seemed to still be burning on her body. There was a searing pain in her heart. She almost could not breathe from the pain. Deep-set hatred tangled with the pain swirled through her thoughts. She could not make out whether she was dreaming or if she was awake. She stared dazedly at the snowflakes hanging from the drapes. She only realized half a second later that they were drapes that she used to love. There were also green and red coral-patterned accessories hung around her. The elegant falling flowers in the red and green color looked very elegant. The drapes swung in the breeze, looking even more beautiful. She pushed away her blankets dazedly after a while. However, she saw her slender arms that had not yet finished developing. She pushed herself into a sitting position on the bed slowly. A child-like face appeared in the dressing table mirror not far away. It was a young girl, hold on. Drapes, slender arms, and a child-like face. Mo Shuadong looked at herself in the mirror with wide eyes. Her heart rate increased madly. She lifted her arms incredulously and then looked at her dazed features in the mirror. This was how she looked like when she was younger. The hairpin inlaid with gold and jade on her hair was the one cousin Xian had gifted her when she turned 13. Could it be that she did not die and had gone back to when she was 13? Her fingers shook in her sleeves agitatedly. Then, she clenched her fingers tightly. The sharp pain immediately told her that everything before her was real, really, she had been reborn. She had gone back to before the tragedy had happened. Even though it was not the start, it was not the end either. There was still time. She bit her lips tightly and forcefully tampered down the urge to jump and laugh madly. Tears filled her eyes. Looking at the childish and pale face of the young girl in the mirror, she remembered that she had fallen into the river that year and had been comatose for 2 days. She had indeed only been 13 years old then. An indescribable joy and sadness filled her heart. She bore down on the emotional upheaval in her heart and held her hands tightly together. However, she could not control her slight tremble. Her first thought was that God was indeed fair. She had been reborn. God must have seen her tragic circumstances and allowed her to seek her own revenge. She did not have to wait for the next life. She could seek revenge in this life. Anti-Fong, Mo Shuamin, Sima Lingyun. She would not trust the wrong people again. This time, it'd be her turn to send them to hell. Miss, do you want some water? Does your head still hurt? You mustn't scare your nursemaid again. How am I to live if something happens to you? How are you feeling now? Are you hurting anywhere? A middle-aged woman wearing a gray robe lifted the door curtains and entered. She paused for a moment when she saw Mo Shuadong sitting in bed dazedly. Then, there remained only pity on her face. She hurried forward and she reached out to tuck the blankets in and then touched Shuadong's forehead out of habit before she relaxed and started nagging. This nagging made Mo Shuadong feel warm and happy. Mother Su. It was her nursemaid, Mother Su, who had stuck by her through thick and thin. When she saw the familiar haggard face, she could not help but cry. Blurring her sight, she took in Mother Su's familiar scent and the warm body beneath her hands. Mo Shuadong's tears fell unceasingly. She recalled that incident that it was her mother's death anniversary the day before yesterday. She was praying beside the lake. She had picked time after dinner when there were fewer people to go since she was not at her own home. She had brought 2 maids, Mo and Mo Zhu, with her. She hoped that the river would be able to bring her yearning for her mother back to her home. She had left her mother's fan behind. Mo had returned to retrieve. Mo Zhu retreated to behind her after preparing the incense table. She knelt quietly on the floor and started to pray. However, she did not know that trouble would descend from the skies. A rock had loosened from the fake mountain, crashing upon her. She got up hurriedly and wanted to run away, but her skirts had been tangled up with something and she fell into the river. She had almost died that time. She had only regained consciousness after 2 days. That's right. She remembered clearly that there were not any things that could have tripped her nearby. The ground was empty around her and there was not even a blade of grass. However, she was tripped and landed in the water. The feeling as if there was something choking her at her throat so that she could not breathe felt so real. She dove into Mother Su's embrace and sobbed so hard she could not catch her breath. Miss, Mississippi. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Let Mother Su see. Mother Su thought she had been shocked by the incident when she saw her crying. She heart ached as she held Mo Shuadong and patted her back lightly. She coaxed her in a gentle voice, "It's all right, miss. Miss, it's fine now. Mother Su is here." She held Mother Su tightly and cried even harder. She cried as if her heart and lungs were tearing. It was as if she wanted to cry out all hatred, anger, and fear. After this time, she would not cry again. In the future, those people would cry, those people would hurt several times over more than how she hurt now. Tolnger, what's wrong? Who bullied my Tolnger? There was a clear and familiar laugh at the door. She had not yet entered and the sound of her laughter could already be heard. The curtains outside were lifted highly by a person. MDMU entered with a smile on her face. She was about 30 and was beautiful. She wore a light coral pleated skirt and seemed especially young. When she entered, she sized up Mo Shuedong. When she saw that the girl was lying weakly against the bed, she went up to her bed and sat down, holding her hand affectionately. Aunt. Mo Shuedong tampered down on the sharpness in her eyes and looked up tearily. She looked at MDMU dazedly. Through the hazy tears, she saw the coldness in the shrewd eyes. She did not look a little sad or worried at all. You look so pitiful. You're so skinny. Your body is too weak. You have to rest more. MDMU quickly ordered Mo Zhu, who came in with her. Her smile was kind, and she looked like an elder who doted on a younger family member. However, she did not mention anything about Mo Shuedong falling into the water. Miss, lie down and rest. You tripped because you're so weak. Look, Madam was so worried after you fell into the river that she couldn't sleep. You're so lucky to have an aunt like Madam to dote on you. Mo Zhu walked up, wanting to help Mo Shuedong lie down. She was a maid wearing a cotton floral dress. She was about 15 or 16 and was in the prime of her life. She looked weak as if a gust of wind would blow her away. She looked like a good servant who was worried about her mistress. However, when one listened closely, they would hear that she was not speaking up for Mo Shuedong, but was praising MDMU. Instead, she said that Mo Shuedong was weak and made her elder worry for her. Mo Shuedong looked up and glanced at her. She laughed coldly in her heart to Mo Zhu. How could she forget her? She was ill right now, but Mo Zhu had not cared for her but went to MDMU to court her affections instead. She was blaming Mo Shuedong for not knowing her place while leaving in someone else's house, getting into trouble. Now that she thought about it, it was obvious that someone had tripped her up by the lake. There was no one else but Mo Zhu there. Listen to the full novel at FameTV.info, direct link in the description.